Hello, and thank you for watching this presentation. My name is Mika Titura, and I'm a part-time research scientist with the Borderlands Research Institute at Sora State University, where I'm involved in research and outreach-related activities as part of the bird conservation program, which I'm going to tell you a little more in this presentation. Our mission at the Borderlands Research Institute, or BRI, is to help conserve the natural resources of the Chihuahuan Desert borderlands through research, education, and outreach. On the map, you can see our area focus, which spans several states and two different countries, and therefore we mainly work through partnerships and collaborations. Within the BRI Bird Program, we focus on the same components as in our overall mission to help conserve the birds in the Chihuahuan Desert: research, education, and outreach. In our research, we focus on wintering grassland birds in the Chihuahuan Desert, and here we have two main projects. The first one is overwinter survival and habitat selection of birds and grasshopper sparrows, the birds you can see in these pictures, and I'll talk a little bit more about that project. And the other project is on grassland bird community response to habitat restoration. I'm not going to talk about that project because it's part of a different presentation that you can watch by Alejandro Chavez. So to learn more about this project, I really recommend you watch his presentation. Our education and outreach program started with the grassland bird captures that were part of the overwinter survival project. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And this kind of resulted into two new projects that we're currently having. The first one is the Borderlands Birding Bonanza, where we organize field trips. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And the other is a project on international collaboration and student exchange with the University of Chihuahua. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. But first of all, why the focus on grassland birds, you may ask? We are, of course, in the Chihuahuan Desert, and a large part of the Chihuahuan Desert is grassland, but there are also other habitat types. So why do we focus on grassland birds in particular? I'm showing a picture here from a study that was published in Science in 2019. And this study showed that we lost 3 billion birds in North America since 1970. And of all the different bird groups, grassland birds showed the steepest decline, with more than 50% since 1970. So to conserve and restore bird populations in the Chihuahuan Desert, we really need more information on their ecological requirements, what is causing their declines, and what can we do to stop or even revert these declines. So now I'll talk a little bit about the first research project that I mentioned, and I'll show some results of the study on birds and grasshopper sparrow winter survival and habitat selection. This is a project we worked on for 3 winter seasons from 2016 to 2019. And within this project, we had the following objectives. First of all, we wanted to estimate winter survival rates of both species to get an idea of how many birds survived the winter. And then we wanted to identify the limiting factors for their winter survival. We also looked at home range size to get an idea of space requirements, and then we evaluated bird habitat associations relative to habitat conditions to get an idea of what these birds need in terms of vegetation structure. So here you can see again the two study species, parrots and grasshopper sparrows. They both overwinter in the Chihuahuan Desert, both have declining populations. And we chose these birds as our study species because both of them are grassland obligate birds or grassland specialists. This means they rely on grasslands in good condition for their survival. And this means they're also an indicator of the quality of the grassland. Both birds are solitary and secretive. When you flush them, they will fly short distances and then run again through the vegetation. And this makes them very difficult to see during winter and migration, and also has some consequences for our capture methods, of which I will speak in a moment. Our study site for this project was the Dixon Water Foundation's MIMS Ranch, which is located in Marfa, Texas. It's part of the Marfa Grassland Priority Conservation Area, and is considered a grassland in a really good condition. You can see a picture on the right of the condition of the grass during our study period. And on the left, you can see a map of the ranch, which shows there are two different grazing systems. The largest part of the ranch is rotationally grazed, where cattle are moved daily, and a smaller part is grazed year-round, which is the continuous pasture. This project was part of a large international collaboration led by Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. And here you can see the 4 winter sites that were part of the project. So you can see that our study site was the only site in the United States, and there were 3 more sites in Mexico. And the important thing is that on all of these sites, we followed the exact same methodology. And therefore, results are comparable, and we can get a full picture of the limitations to winter survival and the requirements of these birds throughout their whole winter range in the Chihuahuan Desert. This is A very brief summary of the methods used in this project. First, we captured birds using mist nets. I'll show you how in the next slide. And then we banded birds and tagged them with VHF radio transmitters. You can see in the picture what this looks like when the transmitter is fitted on the bird. The transmitter is very small and weighs less than 1 gram, and it's attached with a harness that loops around the legs of the birds. We captured birds early winter to place the transmitters. Then we tried to recapture them midwinter to replace the transmitters because battery life is only about 40 to 55 days. And then we tried to recapture them early March to remove the transmitter before migration. So the project started mid-December, and we tracked birds daily from mid-December to early March for 3 winter seasons. 2016-2017 was the first season, and 2018-2019 was the third and last season of this project. We tracked birds daily and then determined whether a bird was dead or alive. If a bird was dead, we tried to identify the cause of mortality. We took a GPS point for each bird location, and then we measured vegetation in bird locations and also across a grid of. So this is what these bird captures look like. We set mist nets in dense patches of grass, and then with the help of a group of volunteers, we make a semicircle around the net, and then we walk slowly from the back to the front to try to flush all the birds in the circle into the net. So maybe you remember that I mentioned earlier that these birds usually don't fly very high, but they fly a short distance when flushed and then hide again in the grass. So we try to use that behavior by walking slowly from the back to the front and little by little move the birds forward until they fly in a net. And if that goes according to plan, you get what you see on the right, which is a grasshopper sparrow in the net. Now I'm going to go through some of the key results of this project, starting by effort and bird fate. So what you see in this table is how many birds were banded, tagged, and how many of those were confirmed to die or survive in the 3 winter seasons. You can see by species and the total. So for example, in 2016-2017, you can see we tagged 66 birds, and of those we have 3 confirmed mortalities and 29 birds were confirmed to survive the season. In 2017-2018, we tagged 78 birds. Of those, 21 were confirmed mortalities and 33 birds were confirmed to survive the season. And then in 2018-2019, we tagged 73 birds, of which 1 sprig pipit, 13 birds were confirmed mortalities, and 35 birds were confirmed to survive the season. The main direct cause of mortality was predation by loggerhead shrike or other diurnal raptors. 16 or 13 birds were confirmed to be predated by loggerhead shrikes or diurnal raptors, and 8 birds died of apparent exposure. This is mainly when we found intact bodies after, for example, a cold night without any signs of predation. So we assume birds died of exposure. Then here we can see the results on winter survival. The graph is showing the estimated probability of survival for year 1, 2, and 3. So year 1 is 2016, 2017, 2017, 2018, and year 3 is 2018, 2019. In blue we see Baird sparrow, in yellow we see grasshopper sparrow. So we can see that there was a lot of variation in survival between years and species. In general, Baird sparrow had a higher winter survival from 77 to 100%, and grasshopper sparrow had an estimated probability of survival of 47 to 79%. The second year, we had the lowest survival. This was the coldest year of the three winters. So then we looked at which covariables were most explanatory for winter survival. We looked at minimum temperature, grass cover, grass height, background, shrub cover, shrub height, and of these, minimum temperature was the most important, which is in agreement with the lowest survival in the second winter, which was the coldest winter. So to look at this in a little more detail, we did a pilot study on microclimate where we placed temperature loggers in bird locations and random locations to look at microclimate temperatures. And here we found, when we compare different vegetation types, that first of all, the average minimum microclimate was the highest in shrubs. So shrubs are the least cold, but we also know that these birds generally avoid shrubs, especially during the day, though we need more information at night. But what is important here that there was apparently a small but significant difference between short and tall grass. So tall grass is a little bit warmer than short grass. The difference seems small, but for a small bird trying to survive in a cold climate, this difference could be critical. So this suggests that um, possibly sufficient cover may mitigate some of the effects, negative effects of low temperatures during winter on survival of grassland birds. These results were part of the master thesis of Denise Paris, um, and are also part of a publication that is submitted and is in review. But if you want to read more, you can read Denise's thesis. And here you can see some results on the estimated home range sizes for both species together in the 3 different years. We used kernel density estimators to look at home range at 95% and core area at 50%. So what we can see, for example, for home range is that there was a lot of variation between individuals and years. In 2018-2019, we had the smallest home range of 0.59 hectares, and the largest home range we had in 2016-2017 of 54.98 hectares. So there's a lot of variation in core area as well, and this is mainly or was mainly caused by some birds just staying around their capture areas, but other birds showing a lot of within season dispersal. So they moved around a lot until settling somewhere for the rest of the winter. So we have 3 examples of home ranges on these figures. To the right, the green one, you can see the scale. So this is a bird that didn't move a lot. He was captured and stayed most of the winter on the same spot. To the figure of the left, you can see this is on a much larger scale. You can see the blue bird was like an average home range size, and then the red bird moved around a lot all winter and has a very large home range because of all these different movements. We tried then to identify what are important predictors of home range size from the vegetation variables that we measured. We didn't find any relationship with any of the vegetation variables for bear sparrow. Nothing could explain the variation in home range size of bear sparrow. But for grasshopper sparrow, we found that grass height and shrub cover were negatively related to home range size. So with more grass and more shrub cover, grasshopper sparrows tend to have smaller home ranges. This is also part of Denise Paris' thesis. So if you want to read more about this, you can look at her master thesis. And we looked at habitat selection in relation to vegetation structure to see which vegetation characteristics these birds may be selecting for or which they may be avoiding. We use the resource selection function to do this, and what we see in these graphs are the model estimates of the most important variables in the models of both species explaining their habitat selection and the 95% confidence intervals. On the left we have grasshopper sparrow, and on the right we have barred sparrow. So for grasshopper sparrow, there were only 2 variables important in explaining their habitat preferences. These were bare ground and grass height. Now, if these model estimates are positive, it means that birds are selecting for this variable, and if they are negative, it means that birds are avoiding this variable. So we can see that grasshopper sparrows avoid bare ground and they select for grass height. Then in the models for bear sparrow, we found more variables to be important in explaining their habitat selection. We can see grass cover, grass height, shrub height, forb height, salsola, and other cover. And here we see there was a selection by barred sparrows for grass cover, grass height, and other cover, and an avoidance of shrub height, forb cover, forb height, and salsola. These results are part of another master thesis that was published in 2020 by Fabiola Baeza. So if you want to know more about this project, you can look up her thesis to get more information. Another thing that Fabiola did was look at habitat selection in relation to seed availability in the soil seed bank. She collected soil samples and bird locations and random locations in both grazing systems at the MIMS ranch. We can see in blue the continuously grazed pasture and in yellow the rotationally grazed pasture. And what this shows is that seed biomass was higher in bird locations in the rotationally grazed pasture, but not in the continuously grazed pasture. So at least in the rotationally grazed pasture, it seems to indicate that birds are selecting for seed availability in the soil seed bank. This is not necessarily because of grazing, because the two pastures are different in a number of ways other than grazing, but it does seem to show that at least in some occasions, birds may queue in on safe resources. Some general conclusions on this project. First of all, we found that winter survival was variable and most strongly affected by low minimum temperatures. We also found that vegetation structure, or tall grass cover, seems to be able, at least partially, to mitigate the negative effects of low temperatures by providing microclimate refuges. For home ranges, we found them to vary between 1.5 to 7.5 hectares on average, and we also found a large amount of within season dispersal. Most individual birds do not stay at the same spot during the winter, but seem to move around all winter long. When we looked at the determinants of home range size, we did not find a strong relationship with any of the vegetation structure variables that we measured. So what determines home range size and what determines these within season movement patterns is a topic for future research. Then when we look at habitat selection, we see that both species prefer tall and dense grass cover, and barred sparrow seems to be more selective than grasshopper sparrow and also avoids shrub cover, forb cover, and salsola. And finally, we found that both species may queue in on seed resources, at least in this case in the rotationally grazed system. So what are the next steps in the research component of the BRI Bird program? First of all, we have some data from the winter of 2019-2020 that still need to be analyzed. During that winter, we captured birds and grasshopper sparrow using systematic mist nets to estimate their abundances. And we want to compare these estimates to estimates using line transects because we believe that line transects may sometimes be underestimating the abundance of these cryptic species. We also collected data during that winter from the diet from these two species by flushing their stomach with water. So what we want to do is look at their winter diet relative to the seed availability in the soil seed bank in the two grazing systems at the MIMS range. For this, we are still looking for some funds to do the molecular analysis to identify the seed species in the diet samples of these two birds. So if anybody listening to this presentation has an idea on some funding opportunities, I would really appreciate it if you could let me know, and my email address will show up at the end of this presentation. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have another large research project going on, which is on the effects of habitat restoration on wintering grassland bird communities. And this project is part of a master thesis of Emily Card, who is a current graduate student with the Borderlands Research Institute, and it's also, or it was part of the master thesis of Alejandro Chavez. And like I mentioned, he recorded another presentation for the Hummingbird Celebration. So if you're interested to learn more, you can watch his presentation, which I really recommend. So with that, we conclude the part on the research component of the BRI Bird program, and I will now talk a little bit about outreach and education. So the first main outreach event or events that we had was through the bird captures. So for 4 years, um, 3 times per year, we received volunteers that helped us to capture birds by herding them into the mist nets. And I'm very happy and overwhelmed to say that we received more than 200 volunteers that participated in the captures. We received birders from all over Texas, from different organizations or from the local community. We also received college students from many different universities, and we had groups of homeschooled children. So we are very happy and very overwhelmed by the interest of everybody in our project. And I want to take this moment to thank you, although I will do it at the end again, for your participation, because the research project would not have been possible without the participation of so many volunteers. Here are some pictures that show how we try to provide education to the participants in the bird captures. So on the top left, you can see that we are banding a bird and you can see volunteers standing around. So what we did was try to explain to all the participants what we were doing, give them a chance to show how we band birds, which measurements we take, how we do this, explain what happens with the data. On the top right, you can see that we are showing a bird to the volunteers, in this case, a group of homeschool children. So with every group of volunteers, we try to show at least one individual of each species and try to show how you identify them and what is different about them. And then on the top, you can see volunteers that are releasing a bird. So at least most of the participants in the bird captures who wanted to got a chance to release birds that were banded and radio tagged. The success of the bird captures and the huge participation of volunteers resulted in two new projects. The first one is the Borderlands Birding Bonanza, which was launched in October last year. And this is funded by Dixon Water Foundation and the Shields Airs Foundation, and it consists of two different components. One is field trips and workshops centered around birds for the general public, and the other component that still needs to be launched is a citizen science project in which we plan to monitor bird populations on private ranches. So this is a way to connect birders with private landowners in which both obtain something useful. Birders get access to private ranches where they usually can't bird, and private landowners obtain a list of species present at their ranch. And here you can see some pictures of the field trip to the Alameda Creek Preserve from Dixon Water Foundation, which was the first field trip that we conducted as part of this program. Another project that grew out of the experience with the bird captures is a collaboration with the University of Chihuahua, which is funded by the 100,000 Strong in the Americas Innovation Fund. During the final year of the bird captures, we invited groups of students from the University of Chihuahua who participated in the capture, and we also offered them some training on bird identification and some of the field methods. This grew really popular with the students from the university, the ecology students from the University of Chihuahua, and from this, we came up with the idea to formalize this collaboration and offer a more official course to the students for which they can obtain credits. So the proposed activities for this grant are a field course for the students of the University of Chihuahua with BRI and Colorado State University, and also the opportunity for 2 to 4 really interested students to participate in some of the research activities that are part of the BRI Grassland research. Both activities were planned for past winter, but because of the pandemic, we were not able to do any of this. So hopefully we can continue or retake these activities next winter. I've come to the end of the presentation, so thank you if you are still with me for your interest. I want to thank our collaborators and funders. The research project on winter survival was funded by Texas Parks and Wildlife and received generous donations of Texas Ornithological Society and Fort Worth Audubon. I also want to thank Bird Conservancy of the Rockies, Dixon Water Foundation for their collaboration in this project, and the other research project that I mentioned on habitat restoration is funded by NIFLIF. And I want to thank the students who did most of the work that led to the results that I presented today, Denise, Fabiola, and Alejandra. You can see their pictures here. And then on the top left is a picture of myself because I realized that you can see me when I present this way. And then finally, I want to thank the field technicians that worked on the project and all the volunteers that helped us capture birds for this research project. There was not enough space on this slide to put all of you, but thank you to everyone who helped in this project. And thank you to everyone listening to this presentation. If you have any questions, then please contact me on the email address that you can see here, and I will be very happy to answer your questions. Thank you.